1945, the most bloody conflict in human history, World War II. World War II ends, but later that year, the world will begin to be consumed by a new conflict, the Cold War. English writer George Orwell was first to coin the term Cold War in 1945. The Cold War was a 45-year ideological global conflict between the dueling superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union with their different ideologies, capitalism and communism. The two powers quickly became rivals and began to split Europe into two military alliances, called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, for Western and democratic nations, and the Warsaw Pact for the Eastern and communist nations. These two sides wanted to spread their ideals and influences all over the world to outdo the other without going directly into war. After World War II, the United States under President Truman were confident with their superiority over the Soviets. The United States had a monopoly on nuclear weapons, and communism was only in Russia and had been forced on their Eastern European satellite states. But as time went on, their confidence in their dominance disappeared. The Red Scare also caused a widespread Yohis versus Reds mentality, as well as paranoia about communist or Soviet agents in the United States. The government's first response to this domestic panic was the 1950 McCarran Internal Security Act. President Truman himself tried to veto the bill, but the veto was overruled by the Congress and passed. Truman famously called the bill a long step toward totalitarianism. This act led to the creation of the Subversive Activities Control Board, or the SACB. The government committee was tasked to investigate possible communist infiltration in the United States. The act also moved to prohibit registration into the Communist Party of the United States, restrict Communist Party members from holding government office, and even the deportation of immigrants suspected of communist ties. The president didn't make things much better as Truman ordered Executive Order 9835, also known as Truman's Loyalty Order. This executive order resulted in FBI investigations for the loyalty and backgrounds of all federal employees. It was recorded that over 3 million government employees were investigated, and about 300 of them lost their jobs because of the investigations.
Similar to the SACB, there was another government committee set up to root out traitors in the private and civilian sector called the Hawk. The Hawk was the House Un-American Activities Committee. It originally had been created before the Cold War in 1938, but its job then had been investigating fascist subversive activities in the country prior to World War II. Now the committee was called upon again and began huge investigations on any and all U.S. citizens suspected of being involved in communist subversion or espionage. They would bring the accused before Congress to testify and to give names of any others involved. The Hawk could also hold defendants in contempt of court and have them imprisoned, as did happen in the famous Hollywood 10 case. The Hawk broke headlines with the court case against the Hollywood 10, a group of left-wing Hollywood writers, directors, and actors that spoke out against the Hawk investigations and refused to answer to allegations of their communist affiliations. The Hollywood 10 ended up spending time in prison and blacklisted in Hollywood, ending their careers. The Hawk investigations continued until one individual named Whittaker Chambers was brought before the Congress to testify. He admitted to being a former Communist Party member and a Soviet agent. He offered to act as an FBI informant on other communist agents. Primarily, he accused the well-respected State Department official Alger Hiss. Quickly, Hiss was put on trial, and during the hearings, Whittaker called out Hiss, saying he had been a communist spy in the 30s and produced copies of classified state document files that dated back to the 30s. He then stated that Hiss had passed them on to him for delivery to Soviet agents. Alger Hiss was later convicted in 1950 and soon found himself in prison for almost 4 years. This case quickly became infamous as a well-respected federal employee who was high in the ranks of the State Department and a U.S. representative who attended both the Yalta and Potsdam Conference during World War II, like Alger Hiss, was convicted and imprisoned for committing illegal espionage and betraying his country to the Soviet Union. It really showed the American people that nobody, not even those in government, could be trusted. An atmosphere of paranoia and fear fell over America as more and more cases of exposed traitors and communist agents like that of Alger Hiss appeared. This, plus our foreign entanglements like the Chinese Civil War and the Korean War, ended up paving the way for a man named Joseph McCarthy to take the spotlight on the national stage. Joseph McCarthy was a little-known Republican senator who was still in his first term as senator, but in February of 1950 things would change. McCarthy attended a Republican Party meeting in Wheeling, West Virginia, where he gave a speech that suddenly announced that he was in possession of a list of 205 names of the State Department employees who were members of the Communist Party and possible traitors. Later investigations showed no evidence of any subversive activities in the State Department, but McCarthy continued his allegations and what was described as red baiting campaign. By his second term as senator, he became the head of the Committee on Government Operations. This led to many investigations on federal employees where suspected communists were aggressively interrogated and accused by McCarthy. Despite having no solid proof of any of these accusations, more than 2,000 people lost their jobs or were blacklisted. The practice of unfair accusations and aggressive investigations became known as McCarthyism, and it seemed no government institution would be safe from it. McCarthy's reign of fears and lies came to an end in 1954 when McCarthy went after the U.S. Armed Services. This time, however, the hearings were televised and the whole nation would witness McCarthy's courtroom intimidation tactics firsthand, and they were shocked and sickened by what they saw. By the end of the Army McCarthy hearings, his allies in the Senate were gone, and soon he was officially condemned and censored by the Senate, where all his political power disappeared. McCarthy would die only 3 years later in 1957, and without him, the Red Scare finally began to subside, and the nation would begin to heal and get back to normal, even though the Cold War went on.